If you have a Mercedes-Benz that's older than 30 years old, I highly recommend you remove all the coolant pipes and all the hoses from all the aluminum housings and aluminum nipples. I think you'll be amazed to find just how much corrosion is hiding under those hoses, particularly where they clamp on to the ends of the pipes and the nipples on the engine, like the water pump housing or the thermostat housing and so on. Now, so is the case with my 1976 240D over there. That's almost 40 years old. And when I took this coolant pipe off, this is the one that runs from the water pump up to the firewall for the heater core, it was so badly rusted underneath the hoses. If you hadn't attended to that, boy, I tell you, in a few years it could have rusted right through the pipe. So I went ahead and cleaned this up. We're prepping it for paint. But just priming and painting this is not going to solve the problem, particularly under the hose areas where the clamp goes down tight. Because what happens is you paint that with normal paint, the clamp is going to, make the paint kind of move, and then eventually it's going to work loose, and you're going to have corrosion starting all over again. So what we use here in the shop, and what I'm a great fan of, is Miracle Paint. That really tough coating that will stop this rust here and prevent it from ever starting again. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to coat the ends of this pipe with Miracle Paint before I put the top coat on it. I cleaned this pipe up and went ahead and sanded it, but right here on the ends you can see just how much pitting remains. Now there's little spots of rust there. Because I'm using Miracle Paint, I don't need to get every little spot of rust removed. I want to get all the loose rust flakes off, and I put this on a wire wheel and cleaned both ends. You can see how much pitting is going on right in this area under the hose clamp. So I'm going to go ahead and coat these with 2 coats of Miracle Paint, just the ends. There's also a rusty area right here that was almost creating a rust hole in the subframe on the car where that bolt goes through. So that's a good example. Anywhere you have a hole or a bolt going through sheet metal, that's where rust can occur, and that's where you want to use Miracle Paint to coat that, to coat the hole, coat the bolt, so you literally seal that from any moisture getting into that area and starting to rust all over again. Now, for the Miracle Paint that we carry, it's heavy duty. It goes on fairly thick, and it doesn't run like a lot of other products. I compare this with POR 15, but POR 15 I don't like that well. It tends to be too runny. Watch how this goes on. You can brush it on like this, and I'm going to just come down and go past the area where it's rusted and pitting. I'm using an acid brush here, not a paint brush, because I found you just have to throw these away when you're done. It's almost impossible to clean the brushes once you use the Miracle Paint. They're going to be stiff and hard the next day. Now once you coat this, you're going to have to keep an eye on it for about 15-20 minutes because it'll want to start to run, and you can come back and kind of clean that up. And then I'll go ahead and get this bracket too coated. Over the years, I'm just amazed at what this product can do. When dealing with this type of rust, sure, you could take this part out and have it sandblasted and have it epoxy coated. It's all that extra work. We're not trying to create a show car here. We're trying to create a nice looking driver that isn't going to rust in the future, and that's what the Miracle Paint is really good at. Okay, now let's get this end. So I can just lay it right into those pitted areas. I know that some of you make jokes about my wearing gloves all the time, but this is one time you really do want to wear gloves. If you get the Miracle Paint on your skin and it dries, it's going to stay on there until your skin dies, falls off. Okay. We got those areas coated. Now the tricky part is, where am I going to set this? You can see right here, I've already got a run developing, but I'm just going to let it go, because I'll come back in as this starts to tack up and take another look at it and make sure there's no runs. If you get this on nice and thick and keep it from running, it dries to a very smooth surface. Whoops. You gotta watch your fingers and thumbs. Okay, so I've got this box and I'm gonna lay it up in this box like this. Okay, we'll let that sit and then we'll come back in about 20 minutes and check it. It's been about 15 minutes and I'm back. Let's take another look at this. Not bad, it's not running. Just to check. I'm noticing right away, it looks like I got this on thick enough that I'm not going to need a second coat. Got some real good coverage here. I'm also going down inside and coating that first ½ inch down inside the pipe. Sometimes you get rust right along the edge, so you want to make sure that's coated. Double check this. Okay, that's flowing out real nice. No runs there. Let's just check this end here. Go down inside. Now notice here I've got the cap on the Miracle Paint. Anytime you're using Miracle Paint, I recommend you put it in these smaller containers and keep the lids on, because this product is catalyzed by exposure to air. And if you're working it and leaving it open to air a lot, you'll find that you'll put the lid on, come back in a few weeks or a month and find a skim hard coat on top of the Miracle Paint. So just a word to the wise there. Keep this sealed up as much as you can. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. I'll set that back on the box, let that dry. Usually takes couple hours to really tack up, and then a good 24 hours I'll be ready to scuff this up. What I'm going to do is just scuff this with Scotch-Brite pad before I apply a spray coating of satin black enamel. Let me show you the aluminum nipples on the thermostat housing. These aren't very bad compared to some I've seen. If they're not heavily corroded or pitted, you can just clean them up with some Scotch-Brite pads like this. Same with this one. You see, this one's not real bad either. So I'll keep working these with the Scotch-Brite. If you get some calcium deposits, you may have to scrape them off with a razor blade. But I think I can get these cleaned up without having to use sandpaper or anything that's coarser than the Scotch-Brite pad. I do have a video available that shows how to repair these if they have heavy pitting. I'll put a link below in the show more for that video if you're interested in seeing that as well. Now let me show you the lower nipple, which is in much worse condition. This one is really corroded. There's a real thick calcium buildup on this. You can see how thick that is. Of course, even if you didn't stop the corrosion and try to clamp a hose on there, you're bound to have some leaks because of the amount of buildup. So I'm going to use this razor blade and scrape all this off. This is probably a really good example of what you're looking at after 30 years. I won't do the whole side of the nipple, but I'm going to use some 220 sandpaper. And I'll have to get and really polish this with a paper. I'm hoping this one doesn't have a lot of big pits in it that I may end up having to fill. Once I get it polished down to the aluminum with the sandpaper, then I'll use a Scotch-Brite pad to come in and polish this off as best I can. There, look at that. It's getting much better now. It doesn't look like I'm coming across any extremely heavy pitting. I'll get these three cleaned up, and then I'm going to come back and show you what I'm going to put on them to keep this from happening in the future. You'll have to admit that certainly looks a lot better. Now I'm getting ready to install the coolant hoses and the radiator hoses. Before I do that, I'm going to make sure that the insides are cleaned out. I want to make sure the hoses are cleaned out on the inside if I'm not replacing the hoses. Then I'm going to take the nipples and I'm going to coat them with my anti-corrosive gel. This is an amazing product. When you clamp that hose down on that gel, it's going to hold it right in to the pores of this aluminum and keep it from corroding out in the future. I do carry this gel on my website if you're not able to find it locally. All right, that's it. Now you get to see why it's so important to remove those coolant and radiator hoses on these old engines and what you can do to fix it when you reinstall said hoses.